Obviously, there are other large cities. There are other large cities that have had pensions. There are other large cities that have this infrastructure. How did we end up in a financially worse situation than the majority of the nation?
Well, from an institutional perspective, in the institutional commercial real estate world, we often talk about the so-called gateway markets, and there are different definitions, but I think on balance, most people would think about them, or most institutional investors would think about them as including Boston, New York, DC, Chicago, LA, and San Francisco. And when you look at those major markets, they unfortunately share a lot of the similar kinds of financial problems, political problems, and I would say infrastructure written large, again, meaning school, policing, cultural events, bridges and roads, all the rest, right? And so part of what you see going on, of course, is a flight of institutional capital to places like Dallas, Seattle, Nashville, Austin, Texas, places where the political and financial dynamics are not as bad as they are here. To answer your question more directly, Tom, a large part of the problem is attributable to these unfunded pension liabilities. And when you talk to most taxpayers, I think their eyes kind of glaze over when we start to talk about defined benefit pension plans, actuarial rates of assumption, underfunded liabilities. It's an accounting gobbledygook that causes most people just to turn away and shudder. And that's unfortunate. In my mind, it's a large portion of our financial problem.
So what, I guess, like the way my head always works is great. There's other markets that have a higher demand, right? You mentioned some of them that, Nashville and these other ones, does supply and demand always equal out then? Well, great. There's more opportunity there, but there's also going to be more demand. So things should equalize compared to other cities. I know that's not like an accurate statement. So go ahead and please correct me, because I know a lot of people think that way as well.
No. I mean, obviously, as an economist, I'm a big fan of supply and demand, right? And so part of that, you see voters and taxpayers voting with their feet, right? I think you alluded to it a little bit earlier on, that there's a significant out-migration from states like New York, Illinois, and California, right? And so that is affecting the supply and demand equilibrium in a way that generally adversely affects these fiscal imbalances that I mentioned a moment ago. In other words, if your middle class or higher taxpayers are leaving your city, county, or state, that is generally not a good financial consequence for those who remain. And so from an investor's point of view, the question is always about, are we being fairly compensated for the risk we're about to take? So in other words, you might want to think about things like the initial cash flow yield or cap rate, the growth in future cash flows over time. What do your reversionary values look like given the trend of events? What does the poor financial condition of many of these gateway markets portend for reversionary values? So it's largely, at least in the institutional world, it's always about the relative risk-adjusted rate of return for a given investment. And part of my perspective for the last several years, pre-COVID, has been that the gateway markets don't necessarily offer a compelling risk-adjusted rate of return when you consider that, again, from an institutional perspective, they tend to offer lower going-in yields, capitalization rates, or higher prices for a given dollar of income as compared to some of these other markets that I mentioned earlier.
So I think we are number 50 as far as credit rating. You can correct me on that.
No, that's right.
In the state of Illinois. Is it, other than the pension liability, what else is there that they could do to ever improve that? Or what other options does the state have to be able to improve that? Or is this solely around the pensions and everyone's going to be afraid to give us a better credit rating until we have some sort of plan or step in the right direction with that?
It's mostly about the pension plan, quite honestly. And I should back up a step, right? So there are pension plans specific to the state of Illinois Municipal Employee Retirement Fund, Illinois State Teachers, right? There are pension plans specific to the city of Chicago. There are pension plans specific to Cook County. I think there's something like 350 suburban and downstate pension plans for local police, something like 300 suburban and downstate pension plans for local firemen or firefighters, right? So it is a labyrinth. It is a maze of overlapping pension problems, in my mind, largely attributable to political forces that have instituted these defined benefit pension plans, meaning as you progress through your working career, you accumulate benefits in a plan that will pay you prescribed dollar benefits over time. And so that's in the public sector world, that's the default pension plan system. In the private sector, including those professors who work at private institutions, the plan is the model or the typical pension plan is a defined contribution plan, essentially a 401k type plan, where you, the employee, and perhaps your employer contribute towards your future retirement, and you, the employee, take the risks that you will not have necessarily accumulated enough cash to live your retirement the way you'd like. So as to your question, Mark, how do we solve the defined benefit pension plan? I would argue that we have to eliminate it, that it's been the source of much of our fiscal mismanagement. It's a creature of the political force of public sector unions. And without some corrective measure, I think we have to be fairly circumspect about the possibilities, the financial possibilities of investing in real estate in Chicago, Cook County, and the state of Illinois.